Hello, we are back with another yoga personal training video for your week, and it only made sense to follow up with this posture for today after doing Cobra Pose last week and breaking down baby cobra and the modifications for Cobra Pose. And that is Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, upward facing dog. So I really want to touch on upward facing dog and highlight before I even get into it that if upward facing dog is a challenge for you, I want you to focus on doing Cobra Pose and doing the modified variations of your cobra and your baby cobra, right? To build up your back strength so that when you try a upward facing dog, it's not so much of a strain. Today, I'm gonna go over the specific muscle engagement in your upward facing dog and really kind of break down what it should look like in terms of when you are engaging your muscles properly in that pose. There is a certain difference between Cobra Pose and upward facing dog. And a lot of people, because of where upward facing dog ends up falling in your yoga sequence, usually in a vinyasa flow when you're doing a chaturanga and a sun salutation and you're coming up into that upward facing dog, I'll show you in a minute as a demo, you can forget about the muscles that you're supposed to be engaging to get the most benefit out of that pose because you're just kind of tired from going through chaturanga, you're tired from going through the start of that flow, so then you kind of just dump into your upward facing dog. A lot of students don't realize that they're doing this, and it's no fault of your own. It's breaking down these postures and taking the time to understand them outside of maybe your group class if your teacher isn't able to break down during the class, because we aren't always able to do that during a group class. You know, it's not always easy to slow down enough to properly get into these poses the way that we really want you to, right? If you're a beginner or if you're unaware of you know, these things, these small little muscle engagements that we're still building the awareness around, right? Because when you begin your yoga practice, you're starting to build your mind-body connection, and it takes time for that awareness to build so that you can notice where you may be compensating, or you can notice where you may not be putting your best foot forward in your yoga flow because you aren't utilizing the modifications, right? And that's no fault, again, of your own. It's just a practice of awareness about building your mind-body connection so that you can understand the importance of being aware of that as you move through your practice, because that's how you'll avoid injuries. That's how you'll just continue to grow on the strength that you're building, right? Is when you're able to connect to your muscles in this way, to know that they are working for you, not against you, or not putting your body in a position where the shape that you're getting in, the yoga posture, is working against you. And it's all about awareness. So my little note on awareness there, and that's why I really wanted to break down our upward facing dog, our Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, because there's a lot there that gets missed. So let's finish up my talking, my little intro, and let's go back to the mat to show you what this looks like. So if you didn't check out my video last week where we went over Cobra Pose, I encourage you to go take a look at that because Cobra Pose is a great place to start to build up your foundation to get into your upward facing dog. I have some props here that I'll show you that you can utilize in your upward facing dog to kind of work towards if you feel like you're even closer there, if you feel like you're kind of in that in-between spot of still struggling in upward facing dog, but you feel really strong, you feel confident in Cobra Pose, right? So that's why I have my props here. But let me show you first an example of what your upward facing dog looks like when you're properly engaging all those muscles, as well as where we might lose that because of how we're using it in our practice, right? And how quickly that can get missed. So our upward facing dog is one of those that we come in usually from our downward dog into our plank pose, right? We're flowing through our vinyasa flow, so coming from your plank pose, you're doing your chaturanga, and then it's here where people lose it. They tend to dump down and just yank themselves up into the shape, right? That can be a lot of tension onto the wrist, onto the low back, right? This can be a lot for someone to do when they're not used to the shape, or they may not have the strength in their back there quite yet to support that. So instead, what this should look like, right? when you have that strength is you're shifting forward into your plank pose, coming down into that chaturanga, and you're able to stay lifted that whole time. So those tops of the thighs don't ever really hit the floor. They stay lifted, those thighs are engaged, you're pressing the tops of the feet, you're pressing through the palms, you're lifting out the shoulders, that chest is pulling through, but you're lifting up, right? It's strong, it's not dumped down here, right? If you feel like you can't lift, and this is just out of your reach, that's where I'm saying come down, practice that Cobra Pose, right? So from our upward facing dog, right, you're supposed to then roll over and press back. You hear that a lot, roll over the toes, press the hips back to that downward facing dog. But that's what I'm saying is through that momentum of your flow, chaturanga, downward dog, right, you can lose your upward facing dog and it's not working for you in the ways that it should. So what I encourage you is to slow down your upward facing dog, take it just as its own posture and practice it. Whether that is taking your props, which I'll show you here, you can take a folded blanket and place that underneath your thighs, right? So that you have a little cushion there. And how I would suggest that you come into your upward facing dog to practice this is actually from a plank pose. So from your plank pose, just bring the tops of the feet to the mat, allowing those thighs to then settle down to that towel or that blanket, the hips to pull forward, the chest to pull forward, really press through those palms. But at the same time, you're still able to press in the tops of the feet, squeeze those inner thighs together, create some engagement there with that support of your blanket underneath the thighs, right? So you're kind of still able to make that engagement of the muscles with that support, right? So this is a good place to practice. Another place too is taking your bolster or a pillow, something a little bit bigger, to place similarly, but a little bit closer to the hips. So when you come forward, right, from that plank pose, tops of the feet flat, and then lowering her down, you have a little bit more height, a little bit more support, to then practice pressing the tops of the feet, practice that engagement into the inner thighs, the glutes, and then practice that lifting up and out through the chest, through the crown of the head, right? So you can create that shape with that support, right? So that's what I'm all about here, is knowing how to explore in your practice so that you can use your props to create shapes that best support your body and explore that mind-body connection so that you're able to bring and build upon that awareness about where you're engaging your muscles, what shapes, modifications, variations might be better for you in that moment, in that day, depending on where your body is, right? Because your muscles, your body, it's gonna differ each day, depending on what we eat, what we ingest, drink, right? Just the energy we take in, the energy we put out. There's so much that can affect how our bodies feel when we get moving in our flows. So I encourage you to start here with your upward facing dog, breaking it down as just one posture, upward facing dog, working on building that strength. And then when you're doing your full vinyasa flow with that like chaturanga option and going into that upward facing dog, I encourage you to do a baby cobra, do one of those modifications to strengthen just that sequence of a flow as is without having to miss that downward or that upward facing dog where it really can be built upon and then brought back in, right? So let me know what you think of that. Let me know how these videos have been helping you in your own personal practice. And if there's any other postures that you are just begging to come next, right? Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep bringing them out, and I will see you next week for our next personal yoga training video. We'll see you then.